My name is Bill Roberts, born in 22nd of the 1st, 39, 15 Spring Street, Connorskey. 1940, we moved to Northop because my dad was a long-distance lorry driver and he was working for Arthur Hughes at Aston Hill. I didn't know much about it at first because I was only one, but as I grew older and going around with the other young lads and girls, we used to spend most of our time playing round Mervyn Roberts' farm with Mervyn and his cousins and all that. We spent a great time there, and we used to help with the hay making, milking, making hay in the stackyard. I remember the rats and the mice running about, and old Miss Mervyn's dad catching them, and they had a little terrier who was quicker than the rats. It wouldn't take long before they had the right stack in the corner. And then after that, we, as time went on, I was sort of, I had no one older around my age, so I didn't go to school, I was on my own. So I spent a lot of time on my own with Mr. Mervyn's granddad in the farmyard. And I always remember he had two old cars, 1927 Austins, converted into the hay carriers or just pickups. And so I spent a lot of time with him. And then Miss Williams, the school teacher at the school, because my brother was older than me, the school teacher, she said, well, why not fetch him to school with us? Although I didn't have to start till I was 5. So when I was about 3 or 3.5, I started school with all the older kids up at the school, opposite the Top Monkey. And I spent a lot of time there. And then, of course, when the war went on, around the village, there were lots and lots of people in uniform and lots of local chaps. I always remember there were sailors, airmen, soldiers, and just behind us, at 1A Fern Bag, up on top of the hill, next to the pit on Mervyn's farm, was a searchlight battery, probably 3 searchlights, I think. And along Bringwyn Lane, that was sort of a couple of Nissen huts where they all used to live, the soldiers. And so we, in our house, at that time, we used to put people up who, the wives of the soldiers, and they used to come up from weekends from London and places like that. So we got to know loads of people, and I used to have a great time because different accents and stuff like that. You know, there were Scotch people there, Cockneys, so there's all sorts. And I always remember they always used to go to the Bottom Monkey. They used to have a great time, although there was a war on. And then, of course, the siren would go on top of the village, and that means it was air raid. So everybody had to heave to. And of course, I forgot to mention, the blackout was up, wasn't it? And Mr. Stanley was the book warden, and he used to walk up and down the village, seeing if anybody had any chinks in their curtains. And if they did, he'd tell them to close them. But a lot used to go on at that time during the war. And as I said, there were soldiers, sailors, and a lot from the village. I remember Fred Jones from the Bottom, he was in the Navy. Lots of people in army uniform, though I can't remember their names. But it was quite a time, really. And all the people that used to come there, we used to have evacuees from Liverpool. We had 2 living with us. And Fernbank, I think Molly Roberts had 2 living with her. And these kids used to go to school with us. And it was quite a time, really. At school, the headmaster was Mr. Jones, and we were in Miss Williams's class. And by the time I sat there, I was only age 3. And also another teacher, there was a Miss Wallace, she was a lovely lady, from Eula, I think she was from. And so we go to school every morning with all the other kids and come home at night. And then in the summer, or any time of the year, there was one thing I remember was a trotting horse that used to come up from down Wepper Lane somewhere. And this horse had a lady, and it was only highly polished with a highly groomed horse, and she used to trot through the village. I found out later that she was one of the Freem family, and so obviously petrol was rationed, so he was using her horse. And I always remember Mr. Piers, who was next door, used to grow roses, And as the horse passed, he'd always be out with his shovel and bucket for the manure for his horses, for his roses, sorry. Some nights I was woken up and got out of bed by my dad, if he was home, because he was a long distance lorry driver, and they had a warning of air raid for Liverpool. And the bombers used to come over and used to fly straight over Northop to bomb Liverpool. Apparently, it was dead easy for them because you had to pick the lights up of Southern Ireland and they get the bearings and they knew exactly where Liverpool was. So they dropped their bombs, but they come right over us. And my dad used to get, on a couple of occasions, got us out of bed, my brother and I, sat us on the wall outside and watched these bombers coming over. And we could hear them coming for a long time. And always remember, then behind us, where the searchlight battery was, everything lit up. And they lit all these bombers up. And they kept them in their sights as they went over towards Liverpool. And it's one thing I'll never forget. And I'll never forget the noise either. And the debates by the people, because usually the locals were out talking. It doesn't matter what time it was at night, they'd always come out. And I'll never forget it. And it's something, I don't think it's ever written down, but that's what used to happen. And then in the daytime, I don't know where the planes used to come from, but if there's any German planes over in the area, I think they came from Roastnestly outside Wrexham. There was an airfield there apparently. And the Spitfires and the Hurricanes used to come over there at hedge height, well, tree height, come over Banks's and, well, what was the Chequers now, because we lived in Fernbank. And from that direction. Now, they came over and we might be going to school or anything, and we could always remember seeing you could actually see the pilot in the cockpit. And of course all the kids knew the names. Somebody said, oh, it's a Spitty, no, it's a Mozzie, and all this business. But quite true, they all looked the same to me, apart from the bombers, you know. And I'll never forget that either, because we'd be going to school and we'd have the gas, they were expecting the gas war, weren't they? So what did they do? We all had gas masks. But there was no cable on them. There was no belt to go over your shoulder. So what it was a piece of string. And by the time we started walking up the hill, till we got to the railway bridge, it was really cutting into your shoulder. You know, they'd take it off, put it on your other shoulder, carry on up to school. And this is what we used to do. And other mornings, I'd be going to school, and it was my job to pick up the meat for the school dinners from the butchers right by the railway bridge, just by Sam Williams's farm. Anyway, and up right by Mr. Roberts' shop. And I used to pick this meat up, and that was my job to take it up. And I was walking up one morning, and I just got past the bottom monkey, and down the road came about half a dozen horses, got loose from somewhere, and they were running. And I was dead scared, I didn't know what to do, so I made a beeline, and I ran behind Alan the Barber's shop, which was a wooden shed right outside the bottom monkey, well, it was the car park. And then I hid there while he went past. And then I carried on to school. And then, I don't know why it was, but I was only me on the road. And then, because I got into school and I was late, but I had the meat intact. And that was one of my jobs when I was going there. And then, of course, the headmaster, Mr. Jones, was very strict. And sometimes when we were late for school, or been late, we used to get the cane. And I always remember, we used to have a cane. I think it was a cherry tree cane, and he'd cut the notch on them smooth and like notches all over. By God, it used to hurt your hand. But they don't do it now, do they? But I don't think it did me any harm. But anyway, this is how time went on. And another job I had from the butcher, we used to have to go in any waste bits of meat and offal and stuff like that. I used to have to go and chuck it down a mine shaft right by the bottom monkey. And there's only a bit of barbed wire around it. And they're all capped now, but I mean, there was no health and safety those days. I was only a kid, I was only be 7, I suppose. And I used to do all this sort of stuff. I always had a little bit of a job somewhere. And you know, and we always used to go help on the farm or potato picking and stuff like that. For the farms, sometimes we went down as far as Henry Lloyd's farm, down towards Connaskee. Or sometimes we went to Tommy's farm up at Stamford Way. I remember we going there one day at Stamford Way, and I think it must have been a few days before D-Day, because as we went along Stanwood, down Vinegar Hill and up the other side, along what it was the old A55, what is the old A55, I remember along there was all army trucks parked up, and what seemed like tanks, they were probably armoured cars and stuff. And there was a big string of them down there, and I always remember that we were talking to the soldiers, and they must have been getting ready for D-Day, I should imagine, because I'd be about 5 then, my memory was getting better. And then we walked further on and towards Ewloe Castle, and there were big concrete, circular, solid lumps of concrete. Apparently they were roadblocks. They had a big steel hook in the top, and they were expecting an invasion, and they were to go block the road off. And they were there well after the war, you know. And of course we were always walking up and down that road. We used to walk as far as Ewloe, and we'd only kids. And of course, our mother and fathers, well, they didn't know where we were there, as long as we were back, but they knew we'd be back for something to eat as soon as we got hungry. So we used to have a great time roaming round. We used to go down to the bottom village, Cork. I always remember going down with Mrs. Roberts. For some reason, I had to go down with her, and we went to do it was in the evening. And I always remember, we had electricity where we lived, but this cottage down Cork, there was a big table in the middle of the room, and there was a big lamp, and she took the top off and she lit it, and it was an oil lamp. It's the first one I've ever seen, and it was so ornate, and I'll never forget it. And she was looking after me for some reason, and down in Cork, my friend Barry Oyd lived there, and there was half a dozen houses, and they're backing right onto the river, onto the Wepper Brook. And I always remember they used to keep pigs during the war, and I was down there one day, and I witnessed them killing a pig. Never seen it before, never seen it since. And I'd always remember the pig squealing, and they tied it to this trestle, and they killed it somehow. And I always remember they slit its throat, and the lady got the bowl underneath to catch all the blood to make black pudding. So I knew how to make black pudding at a very early age. And that was another one of my memories. And then we used to play in the nursery just around there. And we used to go over the top of the A55 and down and get conkers off a tree. The tree is still there, right alongside what is now the Checkers, or was the Checkers. And that was another memory I have of that area. And of course, as we came out and started coming up the hill, Ray's just mentioned the pump up the hill. Well, that was there, of course. And as we got further up the hill, there was a plaque on the wall that said this wall was built in 1921, I think. And I was mentioning this at the Bottom Monkey one night, talking with a lot of the old timers in the Bottom Monkey around about 1970s, I think it was. And there was a chap named there, Arthur Parry, who used to be a brickie. And he said, yeah, I worked on that wall in 1921. And it was then I went down and I had a look at the plaque on the wall. And I would actually know the guy that actually built that wall, you know. And always getting this sort of information off these old chaps in the Bottom Monkey. And how they talked about the war and the bombing and as I mentioned before, these aeroplanes going over and all that business. And what went on, you know. And I came up to the top. Of course, the field on the left was owned by Sam Williams. He had the farm by the bridge as you go over the railway. And Sam, he used to do groceries as well. I used to go sometimes riding on his cart with him. Because those days we'd do anything but a ride on the cart or ride in the car, you know. And old Sam used to, that was his field on the left. But opposite his field was I think it was 3 cottages or 2. And there was, Jane Doran lived in number 1. And there was another chap that Mr. Hughes, I think, lived in the other. And outside, they had a tap, a standpipe, right on the road. And I always remember the Italian prisoners of war marching down from their camp at Brigwin Lane, and they used to fill, they had wheelbarrows and stuff, and they used to fill cans with the water, and they'd be there. The sun always seemed to be shining when I was watching them, and they'd all be milling around. But these Italians, they were great, all smashing and friendly with us, you know, and a lot of them used to be singing as they do, and but they'd fill these up, and they had one solitary squaddy looking after the whole lot, but they had no. He knew they wouldn't run away because they were having a good time where they were, and then they'd all march off back up to their camp. And I think the camp's still there now, right at the end of the road. I haven't been down there for a few years. Right by Keikley's farm it was. And but it was great. And they were people we didn't really know what the war was going on, but they were quite friendly with the people in the village. And obviously there's a lot that stayed on after the war because they liked it here that much. And I don't know whether any live in Northop, but it was a nice place. They really enjoyed their stay, I'm sure they did. Especially it was better than fighting. This is another thing we used to do. You couldn't do it now. We used to go to Connersky to see the pictures on the Saturday afternoon, and we used to walk down, sometimes down Wepper Lane, but very often we used to walk down the Buckley line. And we used to walk down, and if there was a train coming, we had just stand, no health and safety those days. We used to stand off and let the train go by. But if it was going slow enough, we could jump on the back of the car's van because they used to have a wooden ledge at the side. Because it was only going very slow. And we used to get off at Prince's Brickyard in Connersky, go to the pictures, and for threepence it was to go in them days. And then we'd walk home. And that was another thing we used to do around there. And it was... As we came back and got off, we'd get off, if we came back up Buckley line, we'd jump off at the siding just to Brigman Lane, and that was Billy Ems's coal yard. And of course, we'd been tidy going down there, and we'd play around this coal yard for ages, wouldn't we? Because our mother and father didn't know where we were. Well, they knew we'd gone to Connersky, and that was about it. And of course, by the time we go home, we were so hungry, because it's black, playing in the coal and in the coal wagons, it was black as the ace of spades. Bit of a reprimand now and again, but not too bad. And on the corner by Bunty's shop, where we lived in Third Bank, there was and it had all chickens on it. And I think it belonged to Isaiah Davis's shop, which was the owner at the time. And I think they sold the eggs in the shop. So we didn't do too bad for food in the village. I know it's bad for people in the cities, but we did all right. And of course, on a Saturday night, one thing I always remembered about this area, it was the bus used to come down on it always used to turn there to go back to Connersky. But I always remember on a Saturday night, especially in the summer, you'd see all the people standing in the queue at the side of the road against Sam Williams's farm, the stone wall, and then they'd all be dressed up to the nines. The bus would come, and apparently, I asked my mother years later, yeah, that was the picture bus apparently. They used to all go down to Connersky for a night out, and they all used to go to the pictures, or they used to go drinking in the big city, Connersky or Shotland, you know. And but I always remember that everybody was dressed immaculate, collar ties, white scarves, you know, everything, grease back, you know. And that's another thing I remember about Northop. And of course we used to go to the Methodist Church, chapel, which is on the left. My mother was a staunch Methodist. We went there, and then we used to get a prize for going. So we went there, and then we went Presbyterian further up so we could get 2 books. And that was great stuff. And because we were welcomed at both places. And it was Mervyn's dad from the farm. He used to play the organ in the top, in the Presbyterian. I always remember that. And we had a great time going. We used to go any functions that was either place. We used to get 2 bites of the apple, so it was great for us. Another memory of mine, living in Fern Bank, it was one day in the evening, it was, must be October time, there was a knock on the front door, and Mum said, go and see who's at the door. So I opened the door, and stood at the door was this old tramp. And then holding out his hand was a tea can. And he muttered something, and my mother came just at that. Oh, she said he wants me to put the kettle on to boil him some water for his brew. And so my mother did this, give it to him, thanked him very much, probably give him a piece of cake as well, I can't remember now. And off he went, and I said to Mum, years later, what was he doing like? Oh, he said, I knew him because he used to call on a regular basis. He used to call when he was going back to the workhouse in Hollywood for the winter. I thought, oh, cracky, because he in the summer, obviously he slept out wherever he was, and he went home for the winter, and he used to get the tea, the hot water, and make his brew, and very often you'd see him sitting somewhere on a grass bank, having his sandwiches and drinking his tea, and that was another thing that I remember, you know. And then, of course, I forgot to mention before, as you got by the bottom monkey, you turned left to go down, there was a gypsy camp. And they were there all the time. I lived in Northop. They lived there. And they were camped, and I used to go down and play with the kids. There was one of them, he was my age, his name was Ned. Ned Hood, his name was. And he had a sister named Annie, who was a bit older. And we all went to school, up in the top school there. And at night time, we always used to play together, but we always used to go down to the gypsy camp because they always had a big fire. And we used to go into these caravans and see how they lived. As kids, very inquisitive. And it was amazing. And I always remember the grandmothers or the mothers just dressed in all the gear that they used to wear, you know, with cloth scarves, coloured scarves and things, long clothes. And all, these horses were tethered all round. And it was like, well, what is it, like a Wild West camp now, I suppose. And we used to have so much fun down there. Of course, when I left from Northop, I never saw Ned or his sister again, you know. But I believe they're still in the area somewhere. But if he's alive, he'll be my age. And if you're looking in, Ned, how you doing? You know. And that was another thing I remembered about Northop. And then, of course, higher up the village, we went and we were knocking around the cricket club and the cricket field and the club. And I remember they had like a little club at the end, and somebody burnt it down one year. And there was all sorts of rumours going around. It was like somebody, young lad smoking in the back or something like that. It was something else that's probably not written down. And then we used to wander down the 4-lane smithy, didn't we? And see Evan, or I think his name was, the blacksmith. And I used to be looking around, very interested in the machinery that was lying around there. And the way he used to heat those iron in the fire, and he used to have a pair of bellows. And he used to pump the coke up, or coal, whatever he was burning, and he used to put the hot metal in, and they used to bang it out, this hot metal, and make a horseshoe to fit. I thought it was great. And, well, a few years later, whoever's seen them, I did a few drawings of the old the smithy, and sadly it's gone now, but it was a lovely place to go. And, of course, you'd always meet farmers there, there was always someone waiting, you know. And we used to come back years after that, after I left. I was still a young lad, but there was a bloke in D-side named Joe the Cole, they call him, Joe Thomas. He had a horse and cart for delivering his coal. The horse was named Jewel. And he used to have it reshod there. And when he used to take it up, we had about half a dozen kids on the back of this big horse, and we used to ride up on the back of the horse, wait around while they shoed the horse and walk back. And so I still had my connection with the 4-lane smithy. And then after that, I used to be passing there all the while. And a young lady came to me one day, and I mentioned the 4-lane smithy. And she said, oh, so I drew a picture, a sketch, pen and ink. And she said, I remember sitting on this particular bank, you know, while we had our sandwiches. Well, she had obviously had a horse. And well, they shoed the horse. Anyway, I did the picture for her and gave it to her. And so I had loads of connections with Northop, you know. And it's the time I spent here was great. And the fun that we had. And I didn't realise the lifestyle we had until I moved down back to Connorskey in 1947. And that was a good introduction because there was all that snowfall, coldest winter on record apparently. And but I still kept connections with Northop. When we moved back to Connorskey in 1947, we still had connections with Northop. We used to ride up on Joe Thomas's cart horse, the local coalman, about 6 of us, to have the horse reshod. And then after that, I always had connections with, because a young lady who had a horse said to me about the four-lane smithy. This is obviously years later. She said how when she was young she used to have a horse shod there, and so she asked me to draw a picture. I showed her a photocopy of what I had, and she said, would you draw me a picture of that? I said, yes, I'll do that. So I remember sitting there. Well, I said to her, I don't think you're old enough to remember the four-lane smithy, do you? Oh yes, she said. And she said, we used to sit on the bank there and have our sandwiches while they shod the horse. So I've still kept my connections with the four-lane smithy. During the war, going back to the war again now, we used to go down Cork, and as you go down Cork and come up to meet the A55, as it was then, there's a triangular field on your right, and there's another field on your left. The gateways are covered up now, they've overgrown. But during the war, the young lads used to come from Liverpool in the Boy Scouts, and they used to camp on these fields. And they used to come to Harden Station with all their equipment. And they used to have big carts, big hand carts with wheels as big as ordinary horse carts. And they used to put all the stuff from Harden Station to this land where they used to come every year. Well, I was there anyway. And they were all from Liverpool. And some of these, we used to go down and play with these lads and see what they were doing. And we got to know quite a few of them, and because they used to come back year after year, but that was must have only been about 3 years. I was only very young, and but some of them, they'd never seen a running brook. Like we used to go down to the brook on the field on the left, and down to Wepper Brook, and we used to have lovely fun down there with these kids, and they were amazed. Of course, they didn't say it at the time. They went, oh, they must have really, when they had to go back to Liverpool, they really envied us having to live there. We didn't know what it was like in the city. But they used to come every year, and it was great. But the way they used to do, and they used to have a big tow ropes, and they'd all pull the cart, and when they were going home, we used to go and see them, and they'd pack it all up and put it on these carts, and tow it off back to Harden Station. And all must have been 50, 60 years later. I was talking to this chap when you lived down the corner from me, and he was one of the lads, one of the Boy Scouts who used to come from Liverpool, and a chap named George Foster, and he'd been in the RAF in Sealand for 25 years, and he married a local girl, and that's what he was doing there, and I met up with him, and he used to come. Of course, he wouldn't recognise me, and I wouldn't recognise him, but and he used to come there, and so there was another. I thought that was quite a connection. Years later with that. But I thought for those lads to come over from there, never even seen a green field, some of them, and the freedom they had there running around instead of having cobblestone streets, it must have been amazing for them. I can remember VE Day. What happened on VE Day, all the ladies got together, they dressed Billy Evans' coal truck up and Sam Williams' horse and cart, and one or two other vehicles from the village, and they dressed us, all the kids were dressed up and plugged on the back of these wagons. I was wrapped up in an old curtain or something, very colourful, with something plugged on my head, and all the girls were dressed up, and there was big celebrations. And they started from the bottom of the village, where the bus used to turn round, and we went up to the village, up to the top. I can't remember which field we went to now. It may have been the cricket field, I can't remember. But I always remember that day. But I really remember, but the people were so happy, although I'd only be 6, possibly, 6.5. And I remember the people being the difference in tone with the people. They were so happy that the war was over. And everybody were really enjoying themselves. And that went on, well, as far as I know, of course there was always a Thanksgiving in chapel on the Sunday and all that business, And, but I always remembered about that time, I can always remember when something was, I used to listen, my dad always had a radio, and people used to come in to listen, and I could hear them saying, let's go for the 1 o'clock news. I think it was only on at 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock or something like that, or 6 o'clock at night. We're going to listen to and then I always remember there was somebody from the village in the Navy, and the ship had been lost. and this guy was only from the village, and it turns out, I'm not quite sure with this, he was on a life belt or something for 11 hours, and he survived. So but I remember the looks on the people's faces, you know, about losing one of our lads. But after the war, the way it changed, and they were all so happy. But they were I could always see the tone on the people, and I was only a little kid, but I could see when people, I used to look up to them, and I could see whether they were happy or not happy. And listening to the news, Lord Ho-Ho going on, and Hitler and Mussolini, you could hear them going on, I could see. I mean, it might have been after the war when they were replaying them, but it was at that time. But anyway, VE Day was great, and we had a great time. And of course, a few months later, it was VJ Day, so we went through the same thing again. You know, wrapped up, coloured up, painted up, and put on the back of a wagon and driven up the village. At least we had a ride on the back of a truck, like. It was great stuff, really. And of course, after that, we were still there for, that was 45, wasn't it? 40, still had a lot of time left. So, a lot of time was spent down Ewloe Castle. We used to go down there, climb the walls, down to the bottom. Then we used to go down to the bottom to the little bridge. Then we used to turn left and go to what they call the Iron Pot, was up there. And it was a part where it was quite deep. Not that deep, but it was big enough for us to lie in. But the water was icy cold, and we used to love to lie in it, you know, or pretend to swim in it. And we'd be out all day, and it was great stuff. But Ewloe Castle for us was fantastic. And the fun that we had around there, and back on the road, and called up Tommy Roberts' farm and mess around in the hay bay there and that. And the farmers used to let us do what we liked, really, long we didn't have any matches, you know. But it was quite a great time for me, because, and all the other kids, because years later, when I realised, met fellas from cities and towns, they'd certainly never had a childhood like we had, you know. And then another thing I remember, I forgot to mention before, this used to make me laugh. Well, not at the time it didn't, later. We used to walk to school, and somewhere, just up from where we are now, this row of houses on the right, going up towards the old school, there was a row of houses, and they had dry toilets. And we'd be coming up the road, for anybody who's never seen one, the thing was, it was like a giant 40-gallon drum cut in half, with two massive steel wheels, with a horse. And they had these guys carrying the stuff out from the dry toilets, tipping it into this, and the horse would go up. And we had to get past this because the chaps always threatened us with throwing us in. And it was quite a game, you know. But I don't know what morning it was, say every Thursday morning, so it was the same morning every week or fortnight. And I remember that. I don't know many people remember that, but I remember it. And then, of course, we went down to the corner pit, that round big Bringwin Lane, as I got a bit older, and we used to go fishing. In the pond, there used to be quite a lot of fishing there. We used to spend hours in there. And then, you know, of course, further along, the prisoner of war camp was still there, but there was a lot of them still hanging on. I don't know what it was, they were still out there after the war, they didn't all go home. But by that time, they were knocking around and everything. And I always remember one Italian guy, he rustled himself a bike up and went to shopping. The war must have been finished by this time, but they kept them till they rehabilitated them or something. I don't know what really went on. And he went down Mold Road. He'd rigged his bike up from somewhere, but he couldn't get any brakes. He ended up through Stead and Simpson's window at the bottom, right by the Catholic church. He wasn't hurt, but he broke the window. But they used to wander around, you know, after that. But of course, being young, I couldn't tell whether the war had finished or war hadn't, so some of these might be mixed up. But anyway, it was a great time, and we used to walk alongside the Italians singing "I Tiddly I Tie," and I used to laugh and sing and all sorts of things like that. And then, I've got to backtrack again now. One thing I forgot to tell you, my dad being a lorry driver, at one stage, I went with him on the wagon. We were going to Mostyn Docks, and his job he did it for about a week. There was railway trucks there. The war was in full swing at this time. there was railway trucks there full of ammunition in boxes. And I was with him, and all the chaps on the docks were loading this truck. And we go up the hills into Wales, we're not within the 5-mile radius of Mostyn. And I always remember going into these different farmyards, and they were stowing this stuff away in sheds and stuff, you know. So maybe it was just a story, I don't know what the idea of that was. Maybe they would have the ammunition if they had to put, because it was the top of the hill there, wasn't it? A copse of Alkin Moor. So maybe it was ammunition for our cat guns or something, I don't know. But anyway, I had a time doing that, and that was a good fun. That seemed to be in the summer. And of course it was on Mostyn docks, there was boats in there and all that business. So that was great stuff. But it all stemmed down from me living in Northop, you know. And with that, I think, unless I think of something else, I'll have to close. Anyway, it's nice talking to you. And there we are. Thanks very much for listening.